Welcome to Week 12, the digital revolution and a whole new world of interactive graphic design. In October of 1950, the world witnessed the detonation of the first Soviet atomic bomb. The U.S. Air Defense was ordered to develop a comprehensive computerized defense system for North America, and scientists in charge established a research center at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, dedicated to the project. In the process, they began developing a world of early visual computing.
Seen here in this 1946 U.S. government video, the ENIAC, the first large-scale digital electronic computer built, used IBM card readers and card punch machines. Punch cards were used both for program instructions for machines and for data input and output. The IBM punch card became the standard medium for data storage up through the 1960s.
The history of mathematical machines, of course, includes devices way preceding the computer, including the abacus, this fascinating machine called Napier's Bones that was invented in 1617 in Scotland for multiplying and dividing, and the Jacquard loom, which used punch cards to program in elaborate designs. The first computers were gigantic engineering projects put to military use by the Army, Navy, and Air Force, defense contractors, and agencies such as the National Security Administration. This mainframe computer, called the Whirlwind at MIT, is an example of the room-sized computers that it took to do basic calculations. This computing power was dedicated to mathematical heavy lifting like calibrating ballistic missile trajectories and calculating the payloads of nuclear weapons. The combination of digital and human brain power at MIT put it at the forefront of hardware and software design for decades. And along came this young man, Ivan Sutherland, who invented the sketchpad interface in 1963.
Rubber bands you're familiar with, but look at what he's doing. He's pointing at the edges and saying, I want them to be all mutually perpendicular, and Sketchpad just figured out how to do that.
Meanwhile, Douglas C. Engelbart invented the first XY position indicator for a display screen, otherwise known as the mouse, in the 1960s at the federal government's Augmentation Research Center. The small wooden box on steel wheels made computers accessible through intuitive movements rather than typing in code or using the awkward light pen from Sketchpad. It eventually empowered thousands of people to use computers. Early computing artists include A. Michael Knoll, who was working at Bell Labs in the early 1960s and was a pioneer in digital computer art. His patterns in three-dimensional forms, programmed in Fortran, caused a sensation and were exhibited widely at art galleries. He worked in collaboration with a visual neuroscientist and experimental psychologist in the fields of visual and auditory perception named Bella Jules. His 1960 experiments at Bell Labs used computer techniques to generate random patterns. Knoll said the computer may be potentially as valuable a tool to the arts as it has already proven itself to be in the sciences. And of course, the first computer-created nude was created relatively early on by Leon Harmon and Ken Knowlton, also at Bell Labs. They made a transparency of a photograph of choreographer Deborah Hay, storing the information as a series of numbers, and then the computer processed the numbers and printed out a drawing made up of symbols common in electronic design. More imaginative is the work of Herbert Franke. This is from 1962. He was also a scientist and explored using photography equipment in the study of physics. He asked if it would be possible to use the microscopes, X-ray equipment, and oscilloscopes for visual experiments that he used at work. Some years later, when the first computer graphic systems appeared, he continued his experiments with 2D and 3D images and forms in motion, using computers and mechanical plotters. He built forms inspired by his love for science fiction, imagining new worlds and new machines. At MIT, the designer Muriel Cooper was fascinated by the power of the new computer systems and formed the Visible Language Institute. She said, "The shift from a mechanical to an information society demands new communication processes, new visual and verbal languages, and new relationships of education, practice, and production." Hundreds of students proceeded through the workshops at the Visible Language Workshop, where Cooper and students pioneered the use of computing systems to create visuals. These 3 self-portraits by a Visible Language Workshop student used early copy, paste, and distort techniques. The artists, designers, and engineers at the VLW were among a privileged few with access to a $250,000 Silicon Graphics Incorporated Onyx computer with 2 SGI reality engines attached. At the time, an enormous amount of effort went into producing visual feats such as these 3D renderings. The process of inventing ways to make visible what was conceptually and visually opaque was at the heart of the VLW's work. Cooper's most famous piece is probably Information Landscape, a radically new interface design for text in which the user could fly through 3-dimensional textual spaces. Thereafter, one of the earliest so-called mini-computers, Digital's 12-bit PDP-8, was built using discrete transistors and cost over $16,000 when launched in 1964. At the time, the only alternatives were the large room-filling mainframes. These smaller systems, such as the Digital system, were now affordable to companies other than just governments, universities, and large corporations.
Off we go.
Barbara Nessum was one of the very few full-time professional female illustrators during the Mad Men era in the 1960s. In 1980, she was invited to study and work at MIT's Visible Language Workshop, but was unable to attend. However, her conversations with the MIT staff about computer-generated art inspired her to search for a system to work on near her home in New York City. She found a sponsor at Time Incorporated, who invited her to be an artist in residence working with their digital video system. She was allowed to work on the computers from 5 p.m. to 9 a.m. and went there for a period of 2 years until 1983. As she did so, she taught herself how to program the computers to produce the results she wanted, which retained her unique illustration style while pioneering new forms in digital art. Nessum continues to work into her 80s using mixed media from digital to analog painting, printmaking, and collage. At the time, computer graphics again were accessible to only a very few people who had access to the heavyweight computing power of large machines. Digital pioneer Nancy Stahl was another young freelance illustrator in New York who found success with a boldly graphic poster style inspired by Ludwig Holbein, which she rendered in gouache. While searching for a way to make her assignments more personally interesting, she heard about an offer from the video post-production company called Charlex. They invited illustrators to come after hours to experiment on their big mainframe computers. She was hooked. Nancy states, "I had felt so boxed in by the way I was working, and this was like magic. I could paint, I could draw, I could do line work, I could do anything I wanted it to do." Once she was able to purchase a Mac, she taught herself a new process by creating the job digitally on her computer at the same time as she worked on the traditional painting, so she could see how to make her digital work look like her traditionally painted work. By the early 90s, she was at the forefront of digital illustration and was invited out to California to test drive the unreleased new program Adobe Photoshop. Her illustrations have featured in all the award shows, and her images have entered the mainstream of visual culture. Finally, there was a computer for everyone, especially every designer. Before computers, we have to remember design was in the photomechanical age. From the 1960s to the 1990s, phototype was the main means for typesetting. It took a whole team to create graphic communications: graphic designers, typesetters, production artists, camera operators, strippers, and press operators. Graphic designers created page layouts, typesetters operated typesetting equipment, production artists pasted all of the design elements onto boards, camera operators made photographic negatives of the paste-ups, the art, and the photographs, strippers assembled the negatives together, and press operators ran the printing piece. Digital technology faced initial resistance by many designers, but ultimately gained widespread acceptance. The digital revolution finally arrived at the desktop of ordinary designers in the 1980s thanks to affordable and powerful hardware and software developed mostly by 3 companies. Apple Computer developed the desktop Macintosh. Adobe Systems invented the PostScript programming language found within page layout software and electronically generated type. And Aldus created PageMaker, an early software application using PostScript to design pages on the computer screen. PageMaker was later acquired by Adobe and then ultimately redesigned as InDesign. The introduction, of course, of the Apple Macintosh is one of the most famous commercials in advertising.
Glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives. You created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of very contradictory thoughts. Purification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Here's the look of the first desktop personal computer, the Apple Macintosh, with a whopping 128 kilobytes of storage. It's hard today to even make any kind of an image that's as small as 128K, and that included the operating system, all the storage, and the programs that were running on the computer at the time. The big breakthrough of the Apple was its graphical user interface, or GUI. A graphical user interface, or GUI, means that there are pictures as well as words on screen that can help the user navigate the system. It was the end of code and the beginning of intuitive interaction with a computer. The other breakthrough was a WYSIWYG display. What you see is what you get. The ability to see on screen, for example, the actual look of a typeface, was transformative for graphic designers. The early advertising for the Mac was for the first time created on a computer. The ads from the small California agency Chiat/Day just somehow looked and felt different. The concept in this ad that if your Mac melts in a house fire, you can take it to your Apple dealer and they will rebuild it with memory intact seems like a naive fantasy now, but the computers were so simple back then that this could actually happen. It's hard to imagine people not understanding why they would want a computer for their own use, but it took some persuading. Some of the promises in this triple page spread or quadruple page spread were a bit of an overreach. I'm pretty sure you could not run the space shuttle on a Mac 2E or probably easily create that detailed dragon rendering. But you could do a lot of things that you couldn't do before on your electric typewriter. Here is the startup process for an Apple IIe. And the thing was, at the time, it seemed so amazing. Mac's first in-house designer came to interface design from a traditional academic background in fine art. A former high school classmate who was a programmer invited her to apply for a part-time job at Apple. That was Susan Kare. The Macintosh featured a bitmapped display in which each pixel on the screen was individually controlled by a single bit of computer data. The fonts for the original Macintosh in 1984 included Chicago, New York, and Geneva. Susan Kare designed the on-screen icons, pictographs that became a symbolic language, allowing interaction between woman and machine. The icons were designed on a grid of 30 pixels by 30 pixels, 900 dots that were either black or white because there was no color yet on the display. Operating the computer was as easy as placing the pointer on the on-screen icon and clicking a button on a mouse. She was quoted as saying, "I pay attention to every dot. If you like needlepoint, you'll love bit editing." Another advance that made desktop graphic design possible was the Bezier curve. Invented by a French mathematician, the system allowed for the creation of complex shapes and smooth endpoints instead of the jaggy edges of bitmapped shapes. This illustration of Pierre Bezier by Glitchka Studios might be the first vector illustration of the man responsible for vector illustrations. Digital typographic characters are generated as Bezier outlines, enabling smoothly curved shapes that are then filled in. Adobe Systems became an influential digital type foundry headed by the designer Sumner Stone. With a background as a mathematician, type designer, calligrapher, graphic designer, and teacher, Stone was the designer of the typefaces ITC Stone and ITC Bodoni, among many other Adobe originals. In 1994, Paul Brainerd formed a company called Aldus after the 15th century printer Aldus Manutius, who you might remember from our fall class. His plan was to develop software enabling newspapers to produce ads more efficiently. The PageMaker software was designed for the Macintosh computer interface and enabled users to create elements on screen. I think it's also interesting. Look at his name, Brain Nerd. Crazy! PageMaker could alter type size, choice of font, and column length and width. It integrated text type with other elements such as pictures, ruled lines, headlines, and borders. Brainerd coined the term desktop publishing for this new method of creating page layouts, which saved significant time and money in preparing pages for printing and revolutionized first the newspaper industry and then graphic design as a whole. Photoshop was developed in 1987 by the American brothers Thomas and John Knoll. It was originally sold as a subset of the popular design software Adobe Illustrator and was expected to sell a modest several hundred copies a month. The brothers Knoll, Thomas dabbled with photography, learning about color correction and contrast in the darkroom, while John happily tinkered with his dad's Apple II computer. By 1987, John was working at Industrial Light and Magic, the film special effects division founded for Star Wars, and Thomas was studying for a PhD on image processing. Using a brand new Apple Mac Plus to help out with his thesis, he was annoyed to find it couldn't display grayscale images. So in true hacker style, he wrote his own code to do the job. By 1990, Apple's color-capable Macintosh 2 and improved software had spurred a revolution in graphic design. This was as radical as the 15th century shift from hand-lettered manuscript books to Gutenberg's movable type. Many designers initially rejected the digital technology and called those who used it the new primitives. Others used it as a tool to expand design possibilities and change the design process. Not every designer was interested in exploring the new technology, but those who dove into it were at the forefront of exciting new design movements. Among these was April Greiman, who early on captured images from video and digitized them. She integrated words and pictures into a single computer file that was output by a low-resolution printer. So looking at this work, it was done pre-Photoshop in 1987. This design was created with computer output and then was printed as layers of lavender, blue, gray, red, orange, and tan ink. The multicolor print job overlapped and combined into an even fuller palette of color. Back then, jaggy was cool. Alas, no longer. More Greiman work. You can spot the influence of the Visible Language Workshop with the ideas of dimensional text and layering, being able to render design elements in three-dimensional space. And yet another piece in 1987. Color and composition here transform the symbolic images into a potent expression of future possibilities. To me, this almost reminds me of an Art Deco style of airbrushed graphic design. These two, Rudy Vanderlands and Zuzana Licko, are famous for founding Emigre magazine. Licko was born in Czechoslovakia and moved to the U.S. at age 7, while Vanderlands is Dutch and came to California at age 26 to study photography. They met at UC Berkeley and founded the experimental magazine Emigre to explore the possibilities of design using new digital tools. After all, everyone was a stranger in a new land, the new land of digital design. The magazine started in 1984 and outraged many design professionals, but helped define the design capabilities of the computer. The magazine also debuted radical new digital fonts for commercial sale by the Emigre team, as well as other designers. Here's a short tribute to Emigre magazine's designs. The Cranbrook School in the 1980s was another center of experimental digital design. This recruiting poster by Catherine McCoy is a photo montage of student projects layered with a diagram about communications theory against paired words of opposites. The digital revolution revitalized magazine design. During the early 1990s, designers achieved high-quality results because of advances in computers, software, and output devices, making the somewhat low-tech desktop publishing industry relevant to professional production. Finally, the magazine design could be comparable to the quality designers were used to using conventional methods, but at the same time, the shift to computer design caused a renewed interest in handmade and expressionistic lettering. Editorial designers for specialized magazines started to apply computer experimentation to the pages of their publications. At Rolling Stone, headed by Fred Woodward, an amazing art director and designer, they created text pages punctuated by expansive double-page opening spreads next to full-page portraits. The opposite title pages were dominated by large display type, and they converted to Mac computer design in the early 1990s, while Woodward still managed to manipulate the computer images to strive for a handmade, handcrafted look. Their use of a wide range of fonts exploited digital manipulation, but also used calligraphy, hand lettering, found type, and photocopied type. This Rolling Stone feature on Sinead O'Connor in 1990 changed the look and the feel of the magazine. The breakthrough layout used large-scale type over 3 pages as a dynamic counterpoint to the photograph. This article about the making of a Soviet bomb evokes Russian constructivism in the hand-altered blocky sans serif letters. And the early 90s brings us to the birth of the internet. This graphic from the Opti project was created in 2003, long after the birth of the internet, seeking to generate an accurate representation of the breadth of the internet using visual graphics. Each point in here is a different node. The artist Barrett Lyon believes that his network mapping can help teach students more about the internet while also acting as a gauge, illustrating both the overall growth of the web and the specific areas where that growth occurs. At least 3 maps are shown on the Opti website, each representing a visual snapshot of the internet at a specific point in time. The first snapshot was this one, taken in 2003, and the most recent was taken in 2018. Some important dates from the birth of the internet. In 1965, the first time that 2 computers communicated with each other using packet switching technology. In 1973, the University College of London and the Royal Radar Establishment in Norway connected to ARPANET, which was the U.S. Defense Department's proto-internet system. The term internet was born with that connection. In 1976, Queen Elizabeth II hit the send button on her first email. In 1983, the domain name system was born, establishing the familiar .edu, .gov, .com, .mil, .org, .net, and .int system for naming websites. In 1984, William Gibson, the author of Neuromancer, was the first to use the term cyberspace. And in 1990, Tim Berners-Lee developed hypertext markup language, HTML. In 1992, the first audio and video were distributed over the internet, and the phrase surfing the internet was popularized. In 1993, the number of websites reached a whopping 60. The White House and the United Nations went online with their own websites. In 1995, CompuServe, America Online, and Prodigy began to provide internet access, and Amazon.com, Craigslist, and eBay went live. In 1995, computer dating was born with the launch of Match.com, and in 1996, one of the first viral videos was circulating, The Dancing Baby.
Ooga chaka, ooga, ooga, ooga chaka, ooga, ooga, ooga chaka, ooga, ooga, ooga chaka, ooga, ooga, ooga. I can't stop this feeling deep inside of me. Girl, you just don't realize what you do to me.
By the mid-1990s, personal computers and the internet were launching the information age. Wired magazine gave a voice to this new digital generation. This early prototype for Wired was produced in 1991 with actually coil-bound binding by the graphic design firm Plunkett & Kerr. In 1984, Barbara Kerr and her boyfriend, John Plunkett, quit their jobs at New York City design firms and took a sabbatical in Europe. They were open to new challenges and new ways of doing things, she said. In Paris, they ran into another American couple. Louis Rossetto was the editor of a newsletter that Plunkett had designed, and they half-jokingly suggested that they start a magazine together. Several years later, Rossetto brought up the idea again and believed that computers and the new technologies would soon change everyone's lives and thought there should be a magazine to herald the new digital revolution. In 1991, his brainchild, Wired magazine, was born. Plunkett and Kerr were now living and working in Park City, Utah, and they gave the magazine a postmodern machine aesthetic. This is John Plunkett on press with a loupe examining close-up details of the magazine. Known for edgy typography and the fluorescent inks that were made possible by printing on a 6-color press, set Wired apart from other magazines and signaled something new in magazine design. To add to the uniqueness, Plunkett and Kerr ordered a custom typeface from Matthew Carter called Wired Bomb, based on the modern serif typeface Walled Bomb. They envisioned that Wired would do for the emerging information highway what Rolling Stone had done for rock and roll a generation earlier. This content spread from the first issue has Rossetti's manifesto of their editorial mission, containing the text of the opening paragraph from Marshall McLuhan's 1967 book, The Medium is the Message. The irony of a print magazine dedicated to the technology that would eventually replace magazines was not lost on the editorial team. This is a hilarious cover featuring Will Ferrell. Early issues of Wired were often called difficult to read, but postmodern text designs in fluorescent colors signaled a new paradigm for print communication to match the new electronic subject matter. This is a 4-page fold-out designed by Eric Adegard called Money is Just a Type of Information from a special issue in July 1994 with great amount of foresight talking about digital currency. Other magazines also were adapting to the flexibility of digital production. This is the magazine Twice, designed by Abbott Miller, now a partner at Pentagram. This issue was dedicated to Merce Cunningham's dance of the same name, How to Pass, Kick, Fall, and Run. Working closely with the dancer, Abbott Miller transformed the words and movements into a visual interpretation of the magazine's content. As digital design took off, digital type foundries popped up everywhere. Early type design systems were very expensive, but when font design software for desktop computers, such as Fontographer, became available, it enabled designers to design and market their own original typefaces. This led to an explosion of new type releases in the 1990s. Type finally was designed specifically for the constraints of digital use. This typographic arrangement of the Stone type family, both Stone Serif and Stone Sans, the type is designed by Sumner Stone, and the arrangement was designed by Min Wang. You can see the harmony of the serif, the sans serif, and the informal versions of Stone. Here, typefaces by Carol Twomley, including Charlemagne, Lithos, and Trajan. I know some of these are a little bit ostracized by the design world now, but at the time they were breakthrough, attempting to translate the inscriptional spirit of the ancient world into digital media. Carol and Robert Slimak emerged as outstanding staff typeface designers who created original designs and did respectable digital adaptations of classical typefaces. Myriad was the first 2-axis multiple master font in 1990. It went from condensed to extended, here shown from top to bottom. The stroke weight becomes thicker. Another classical designer that embraced digital type is Matthew Carter, designing the beautifully made Galliard, Mantinia, Sophia, and Big Caslon. He did a number of bespoke typefaces, including the typeface Walker, which was designed for the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, which had unique, what he called snap-on serifs and other variables that extended the formal range of type. Here are some pieces from Walker that show the flexibility and wide usage in the application of the Walker typeface. He also designed a font for Yale, appropriately with a different look: Yale Roman, Yale Italic, and Yale Street. Erich Spiekermann, a young German designer that you may remember from the Helvetica movie, designed the typeface Axel, specifically for use in constricted spaces such as tables and spreadsheets, while remaining a high degree of legibility. And there was the brilliant young designers Jonathan Hoffler and Tobias Frere-Jones that established the Hoffler-Jones Foundry and produced one of my favorites, Gotham. Nadine Chahine produced the first typeface to have matching Arabic and Latin letters, called Kofia, in 2008. She did an Arabic version of Frutiger in 2004, originally designed as a companion to the classic Latin typeface Frutiger. She actually worked in consultation with Adrian Frutiger during its development. Its forms refer to the traditional handwriting of Arabic script, but the more simplified forms are suitable for signage applications as well as print. Digital imaging was also progressing. With digital imaging software, seamless image manipulation could be achieved, and as a result, photography was no longer considered the undisputed documenter of reality. As boundaries began to fade between photography, illustration, and fine art, they also faded between designer, illustrator, and photographer. Before the advent of the Macintosh, access to electronic technology was expensive and creative potential of computers was seldom explored. This early exploration of digital imaging was done by Pat Gorman of Manhattan Design, who also designed the MTV logo. This press cover kit from 1982 used randomly generated color combinations selected and composed in a repeat pattern. They convey the network's character in a nonverbal manner. This was early experimentation in digital imaging made by creating color variations of the logo using the editing controls in a television studio and then outputting them. This photo montage or photo collage by the designer Woody Purtle for the cover of the 1983 Mead Annual Report show consisted of a wireframe, was then elaborately collaging together these photographic elements. As the internet exploded, we gained interactive media, the internet and the World Wide Web, which further expanded the opportunities for graphic design. Interactivity, when used with computers, relates to how humans and computers act together or relate to each other, and interactive media permits viewers to access information in a nonlinear way. Unlike in books or films, which present information in a linear sequence, interactive media has a nonlinear structure. CD-ROMs became a huge word in data storage and transportation that could hold 600 megabytes of sound, image, video, or data, and was accessed by laser optics. This interactive CD-ROM from 1995 had a coordinated design system that unified the booklets, the packaging, and the screen design. These basic structural methods were used in tandem to bring order to the viewer's experience. It had a linear series you could view like a book. You could use spatial zoom. You could use parallel text, overlays, hierarchies, matrices, and web structures. All of these concepts in nonlinear information architecture were brand new and then went on to influence web design. By the late 1990s, the internet was big business. In 1997, Netflix was founded. In 1998, the Google search engine was born, changing the way users engaged with the internet. In 1999, peer-to-peer file sharing became a reality as Napster arrived on the internet. In the year 2000, the dot-com bubble burst, and AOL merged with Time Warner. In 2004 was the birth of Facebook, and the era of social networking began. And in 2005, both YouTube and Reddit launched. Since then, the internet has dominated the media landscape. In 2006 was the launch of Twitter. 2010 was the launch of Instagram and Pinterest. By 2015, Instagram reached 400 million users, outpacing Twitter. And in 2016, Google Assistant joined Amazon's Alexa, Siri from Apple, and Cortana from Microsoft.
Television, Mr. Adams? Don't even know what linear, non-interactive television means, Mr. Adams? Are you tired, Mr. Adams, of the sort of television that just happens at you? That you just sit in front of like a couch potato? That doesn't involve you? Come on, interact with me.
Wait a minute.
Yes, what is it you want to know?
Who the hell are you?
Me? Oh, I'm just him.
My name is Tom, and I'm your agent. May I ask if you know what that means?
You want 15%?
It means that I'm here to do your every slightest bidding, to fetch and carry for you, to work tirelessly and selflessly on your behalf, always ready, always willing, no job too small or too menial.
Are you sure you mean agent?
I mean that I'm a software agent. I am merely a simulacrum, an artificial and completely customizable personality, and I only exist as what we call an application in your computer. I have the honor to provide instant access to every piece of information stored digitally anywhere in the world. Any picture or film, any sound, any book, any statistic, any fact, any connection between anything you care to think of. You have only to tell me, and it will be my humble duty to find it for you and to present it to you for your interactive pleasure. Is there anything I can do for you now, Mr. Adams, sir?
Well, yes, you can stop being so obsequious for a start.
It will be my very great and profound pleasure to be less obsequious, O Master. I am, as I humbly mentioned to you a moment ago, fully customizable.